It's May 28th, 2014, 12:25 p.m. here in the Pacific Northwest of North American continent at the southern end of the Salish Sea. This is an Immediacy Data Intelligence report for this date. We have some short-term data and a little tiny bit of long-term data, so there are some elements of this report that are effective out until the end of January 2015, but the majority of it hovers from early June through to the end of November, early part of December, with an expected bell curve kind of peak in August and September. We've got a number of elements to go through really quickly. I say quickly because if I allowed myself, we'd just go on and on and on about the details. That's the problem with immediacy data. It's just chock full of details, most of which turn out to be meaningless. So in terms of the broader scheme, it's not really worth going on about. This report is likely to be slightly disjointed. I'm having to do this in segments with a handheld recorder because I'm running around with a bunch of different projects all in critical stages at the moment. Plus, we're getting our data feed from a newly established server garden. It's nowhere near big enough to be called a server farm. It's a little bit bigger than a server closet, but I wouldn't call it as big as it's a server garden, and it's a small garden at that. In any event, though, we've just got it reestablished, and we're just starting to get things reconnected there so that we're getting a good data stream. We are getting a lot of data, though. That's independent of our ability to take it out. I'm just saying that there's a lot of things going on the internet, and that there's been a boost in language about a very large level of diverse subjects, and it is under those circumstances that our software is very good, because of the way in which it deals with these psychic leaks that come out of everybody in the form of the language that they end up using. I won't go into that at the moment. There's plenty of history on that for people to look up if they really desire to. Anyway, so we've got right off the bat, we've got a very confusing central area of model space that is centered around officialdom from the American Empire. It's extensively cross-connected to all of the banks, all the banksters, all of the fraud, and so on. I'm not going to go there at the moment. That isn't the eye-attracting component at this stage. But it must be understood that the officialdom, as we've defined it here within our model space, is so interconnected to everything else in terms of all the fraud and the corruption that we are all laboring under, that have been sucking the life from us, the parasitical increasing government, et cetera, for all these times, that we need to bear in mind that nothing is going to happen to officialdom in the American Empire and be isolated to a narrow ring of impact. There will be large ripples no matter what goes down. And we have some interesting things in there saying that we're going to be getting, I'll just lay it out here. This is, of course, for everyone's entertainment. I doubt I'll be visited by anybody from officialdom for these words, but if I am, I will certainly report on that. If I disappear and don't report on that, you can make the assumptions that you need to. But we have a situation where the data is suggestive of the detail levels that we got 3 weeks prior to the big East Coast loss of power in the past decade. And we're getting those same level of details now. The data isn't particularly similar or anything, but it's at that a particular level of numeric value within the sum of the array values that go to, if you will, an emotional certainty. So basically what it is saying to us in our interpretation, to me specifically here, although I have to point out that IDIR was the one that spotted this data set, paranoid that he is. Anyway, we've got a deal here saying that the reflecting waters of, or the waters of the reflecting marsh, the reflecting waters of a marsh, are going to be put into motion And it goes on to describe a situation in which the sun rises, and I'll just sort of give a brief verbal description of this. The sun is going to rise in a situation where there's going to be officialdom in vast numbers and in uniforms, a variety of uniforms, a plethora of uniforms, in fact, a very rainbow of uniforms, all different kinds of colors. From safety green and extreme orange all the way down to darkest dark and dark, and maybe even invisible dark, and everything in between from gray and the whole hue of all different kinds of officialdom uniforms will be gathered on the edges of this marsh. They'll be putting in all kinds of small boats, which you and I would think of as like aluminum duck boats, or aluminum fishing boats and zodiacs and small portable boats that will be brought in on trailers. And there'll be lots of SUVs doing this, and we will all be focusing our attention on this particular marsh and the activity that's going on there, because it'll all be directed that way by basically the being behind the CNN curtain here. All media will be focused the same way because the 6 or 7 people that own all the media want it to occur. Hang on just a second. So I'm stitching this around the telephone call interruptions and all the other crud that's going on. Anyway, so here we are. We're all watching these guys in all these different uniforms and all kinds of little boats, aluminum boats, zodiacs, and this kind of thing. The reflecting waters of the marsh are probably in the southeast U.S. They may be or may not be in Northern Virginia, Maryland, in that area, bordering Chesapeake and fed by the brackish waters thereof. These marshes are apparently, the reflecting waters of the marsh are going to be reflecting all these people looking down in the water for something, and I think that what they're going to be looking for is evidence of a suicide or somebody having been suicided. There's, of course, all of the temptation to say that something that we might prefer, in the sense that, it might be one of these crazy old bald head white guys. But the data seems to suggest otherwise. The data would suggest that this is a suicided person. Data suggest slightly more than not that we're dealing with an issue of a woman who's been suicided and dumped in this marsh, and her body dumped into this marsh. And then it's going to start this whole flaming fire, because political it looks like, but also economic and social and cultural, etc., because of who this person is. Apparently a famous kind of a person, or somebody who's going to be close to the rich and powerful, or that kind of thing. So we don't get names or anything in data. It does not work that way. You can go out with our particular system and you can do a deterministic hunt on someone and get if you will, sort of a weird kind of a psychic read that may or may not be accurate. We don't go down to that detail because it's tedious and no one's going to pay us to do it. And usually all we collect is bad news anyway. So why would you want to? But in any event, so we don't get names, we don't get addresses. We get at best a sort of a novelistic screenplay kind of a description of things that comes in from the data stream in the hierarchy in which I've got it arranged through this thing that I called the emotive reduction engine. Anyway, though, so the data suggests that more likely than not, female figure who had radiated strength and movement, an athlete of some kind or someone with an athletic background, ends up being in a very nasty way suicided. But the problem for the officialdom is that this is a case where the suicide does not tie up any kind of a loose end, and in fact brings out three new kinds of loose ends that they must deal with. And unfortunately, or fortunately, I mean, universe directs this sort of stuff. Unfortunately for the powers that be, for officialdom, as the data describes the scene at the marsh and hunting for the body and also some other form of evidence, well, hey guys, on camera, in a way in which it cannot later be denied or hushed up or this kind of thing, other evidence will be found. The other evidence will go to the minds of those involved in the suicide. It appears to suggest that this was a suicided individual. And it also exposes a totally open, nobody ever thought to close or even look there, vulnerable underbelly of the individuals involved. What that may be, I don't know. We don't have any descriptors there to describe it beyond what I've got. This is at a tertiary level of support. At the third level down, we get a lot of detail within the immediacy data. That detail has to be aggregated and brought up through the secondary and through primary levels of support such that we get a cohesive picture. Otherwise, it's just basically a random association of maybe 20 or 30,000 words. And so as this is done by our processes, we end up getting sort of an intermediate picture of it by a tightening of the linguistic structures at the secondary level, and then an even further tightening at the primary level. And then that is bonded to the previous set of descriptors that are housing the bag or collection in which this structure is forming. And so we get a top-down sort of a view, and it's very much like a movie script in terms of very sparse, very tense, and so on. But in any event, what we end up here with is, if we read down from this particular incident within the data structure, this incident is showing up as having very, very, very long-term impacts, and an immediacy level with a surprising level of long-term impacts. It's very rare for immediacy values to bring in a long-term impact. At most, they usually are associated with some light, fluffy areas within the shorter term data sets. In this case, the immediacy data is going into the long-term data at a very fierce rate. And it goes on in, and we have such weird stuff as showing up as phrases around structures for evil occurring at the beginning, which is the beginning of this scandal, is based on or built around a neurotic love affair, which is why we have reinforcement for the female being a victim in this, because that's just the way the universe lays it out, and that's the society and culture in which we live. There's all kinds of stuff in here about details that would suggest that the victim here is has a certain amount of duality involved with the particular sets of words. So we get some weird words. So we have blocked, as in airway blocked, as in suffocated. But we also have a larger level of descriptor, which suggests that the individual is a blockage or is seen as an obstacle of a very immediately threatening nature. So immediate and so threatening that these extreme and rather stupid, sloppy, and desperate actions are taken that lead to this particular day where all these guys are out there from Officialdom mucking about in this marsh. Now, okay, we get a whole lot of detail. How much is really pertinent, you have to understand, is going to be really open to debate until we actually get into the situation of it all. Let me reference our Blondes on Boats forecast, in which we had a great deal of detail about a ship of state being upended and sunk by a blonde, all of which turned out to be fine and true, and that's the way it actually manifests. Our ship of state was the Concordia. Hang on one more time. Sorry about that. Okay. Yeah, we're trying to reestablish communications with our servers and running into issues and so on. Let me see where is that. Okay, yeah. So we've got issues here showing up with the younger sister, who really of the victim, who really gets in everybody's face about all of this and becomes something of a driving force. So we'll see her emerge as a driver for this particular set of problems for the officialdom and power that be over the next couple of years. There's nothing that they can do about her anyway, just the way that the data lays out. Let's see what else have we got going there. I'm taking notes and dealing with Igor remote. It's just been a real pain like this. I'm in dial-up. It'll be a while before we have our broadband. We've got descriptions of an individual. We don't know if it's the victim or not, but is definitely associated with the incident and will be described or involved in some way within the media coverage of the incident on the day that it comes out. And that's a woman who's blind in one eye. But the blind in one eye may actually be referring to a woman who stands for the Illuminati. You have to understand that we do have a lot of the symbolism encoded within our data sets, and so blind in one eye, the opening left eye, the eye of Thoth, all of these kinds of things are, the all-seeing eye. These are all officialdom symbols that are used by the people that have their hands up the butts of the powers that be and are pulling all the little gears and mechanisms inside there to make them all speak the nonsense and do all the crap that they do. And so we could be looking at an issue where you could interpret it as an actual female who's blind in one eye. You can interpret it as a woman who's on the scene that she's a temporal marker, by the way. Those can be explained at some other time. I just don't have the time to go into it today. But in any event, she could be viewed as someone on the scene in the marsh whose vision is obscured in some way, permanently or temporarily, and that would fit the description of this individual. Or we could be looking at a woman who stands for the Illuminati, who is on scene, and expresses that in the form of some symbol that relates to the all-seeing eye. Anyway, this individual is may or may not. At this point, it doesn't look like is related to the victim, but is certainly at the center or the secondary nexus center of this particular incident for officialdom and their problems. So the reason to pay attention to this, the arrival of this particular temporal marker of the woman who's blind in one eye, or the woman standing in for the Illuminati, etc., whatever form the symbol turns out to actually manifest as, is that this particular temporal marker shows that the basically is a marker for the ability of the powers that be to take direct action, either in their own defense or even to attempt to screw with the timeline of events. Basically, the time for their ability to take any kind of action as in the flow of events is over, and that this particular individual is a temporal marker indicating that this incident is this particular one in which we see the powers that be have reached their peak and are certainly on the wane, and they find themselves hamstrung by circumstance. Very interesting. We have here also the younger sister that shows up here, the sister of the victim, will also be able to be identified very clearly, because there will be an instant association somehow, somewhere within media that we brought up, and I don't know if it'll be false, disinfo or true. It doesn't matter. It'll just be mentioned and brought up that that the younger sister was, in fact, had spoken in opposition to her sister about her sister's involvement with the people that end up getting her killed. So it's going to be kind of like a situation where the younger sister will have been, written something on Facebook saying, my sister's being a butthead and getting involved with so-and-so. And it turns out that this will be located and made available as a supporting data stream, and off it goes. Okay, so we've got that. Let's see. And then we have some stuff in here relating to the time of day and that kind of stuff. None of it is particularly pertinent, I don't think. There's going to be a lot of attempts on the part of the powers that be that is described here to let blood, which is again a symbol of find a scapegoat, sacrifice someone, and it just isn't going to wash. The blood isn't going to flow. There's not going to be a willing scapegoat that's going to stand up for this, and the roll on the aftermath and follow through of this particular set of circumstances of this particular suicide is going to be really interesting. as it affects so many things. It will be seen. It's not that apparently from the data, all this stuff's going to come crashing down anyway. The political system in the American empire, the economic system that is hosted by the parasitic central banks globally, all of this is finished. The system has gone so far beyond sustainability that it's going to crash. The only issue is what will be seen as a proximate event as a, quote, cause of the crash. And here we find that one of the proximate events that will be cited at some point in the future, accurately or inaccurately, whether it actually is anything more than a temporal marker that is coincident or is in fact a causal trigger, is going to be moot, because the future will decide how they're going to reference it. But it will be this incident at the marsh, and it's going to lead to weird things, a dichotomy of actions, and apparently there's, as soon as this whole thing starts maturing, about the third or fourth day of this particular set of scandals, there's going to be the follow-on scandal, which is the sudden revealing that there's been mass destruction of documents and the attempt to destroy evidence all over, that kind of crap. A la, Watergate, Pentagon Papers. Anytime the powers that be get caught at anything, it's quick, let's burn some paper. And so there's going to be a lot of that. The follow-on will also include stripping down and bearing, in the sense of bearing one's soul, of many of the crimes of the powers that be and their bankster stooges. But at the same time, we're also going to find that bear, in the sense of BARE, bare cupboards, empty areas, are going to be a very high keyword following this particular set of suicided marsh issues. All right, so I guess this is part 3 I've got to stitch in. Anyway, okay, so the scene at the marsh, the boats, all of that kind of stuff goes on. We end up with it being used as a trigger indicator for economic woes, as well as other problems that come into the focus just at the same time as the incident, or following on it, being used as a temporal marker. Now, I think it'll probably end up being a matter of judgment, and again, sort of a history call. But it looks like the data is suggesting that the incident at the marsh, the focus on the suicide, is going to be temporally significant for, let's just say, the landing of the Black Swan on the economy, for the unexpected event that triggers an systemic economic impact. Breakdown is a real good word for it. Dissolution of society maybe in a few years, but initially no. It's going to be a economic crises that will develop as a result of an unexpected, I don't want to say event really. Well, maybe we can call it an event as opposed to a situation. In any event, in any case, we have the reflecting waters of the marsh, the body, the boats, all of that kind of business. Then shortly thereafter, within, say, 3 weeks, give or take a week, error rate of about 3 to 5 days in terms of activation of this. So about 3 weeks after the marsh incident, we end up with our political black swan, or our economic black swan, that causes its own set of political repercussions. The political repercussions go on to contribute to the supporting sets by extensive cross links back internally within that entity to the destruction of the past. So basically what goes on is that a self-reinforcing systemic breakdown occurs in which the political component, I don't know if that's 1/3 of a triad or something like that, but the political component is so involved in its own set of issues and problems and survival kind of things that as the economic component has a big black swan come and sit on it, the political component is absent, without leave, unable to make a decision, unable to respond, in no way participating, and things get out of hand fairly rapidly. So that's the near-term future. Now, when does this occur? I'd really like to know myself. The Black Swan, like I was saying, as we progress model space, it's shortly thereafter, within the next month, likely within the first 3 weeks of that next month. We could be off by as much as a month, but I don't think so. Now, in all of our error types, we allowed the same range of for error, same error potential range as exists in the range of effective time for that type. So short-term data is effective from 3 days out to the end of the third week. And so the error range is basically from 3 days out to the end of the third week, or a 3-week error range. Not in terms of duration, but in terms of when it might appear. So in any event, we've got this situation where there's a very interesting component to the Black Swan supporting sets here that is also kind of curious, because it's talking about an odd recall. We've just come through a bunch of recalls of beef and hummus and all kinds of stuff here in the American Empire over this last holiday period here, this 3-day weekend. There were all kinds of recalls. Now, this particular data set is talking about a background temporal marker, or a pre-temporal marker to the actual lighting of the Black Swan, but it is somehow intimately connected. So when the Black Swan comes and lands on things, it will be intimately connected to the recall of some dried meat. I know it sounds goofy as hell, but these really goofy ones are the ones that always pay off, like blondes on boats. We got blondes on boats as a separate phrase, but in direct support. It's like, okay, that's strange enough, let's go and examine it. And it led to that forecast about the sinking of the Concordia. And, of course, it was a blonde on the bridge, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It was a real good hit. We end up with those occasionally, and this looks like this one's shaping up that way as well, just because of the amount of weirdness that we've got here. In any event, so there's this recall of dried meat. It's either in the background. It precedes the events that affect things by no more than 3 days. We know this just because of the nature of the data type. At most, it would be 6 days with a 3-day error rate problem there, and it goes directly to the persistence of the state of gold. Okay, now not state in the sense of deep state or, the state government, that kind of thing, but rather the condition or circumstances of gold. Now, all of these words, especially in English, have multiple meanings, and there's nuance and all this, but we really do believe, because of the situation in the data sets, that we're looking at the circumstances of gold. And so the recall of dried meat and the sudden change in the circumstances of gold occur nearly simultaneously. Probably the 3-day separation looks good. I doubt it'll be less than that. And it is hugely noted as being good luck. Now, the good luck component is obviously for those people that are smart enough to have the yellow gold. There's also a thing in here, too, about the fake gold and tungsten being wrapped in gold and so on, that suggests that there's going to be a lot of that information coming out about 5 days later, 5 days after the dried meat recall has somehow preceded or tied into the new good luck period for gold, which basically it's saying it's going to be moving into a bull market. People will want to have it, that kind of thing. Sorry, I don't do trading and that kind of stuff. I'm ignorant as a pig about that, so I keep forgetting the terms frequently. But in any event, so there's going to be a rush to get the yellow gold. Everybody's going to go digging for it. There's actually going to be discussions in the media, mainstream and alternative, about new holes for gold. In other words, new mines opening up. So there's going to be something that causes the price of gold or the value of gold to go up relative to its actual cost of production, such that people are all excited about going and finding it. And this is in some way follows this incident of dried meat. So that gives you a 1 day heads up, I guess. Maybe we can say that, when the recall of the dried meat comes out, the data sets that we've got here would suggest that would be the last day you would have to buy suppressed gold at these current suppressed prices. No direct mention of silver within this one, within this particular series of data sets for this. It's focused on gold specifically. And so this is a very interesting set. It's new. It may be that it's defining a precursor to the general movement of other precious metals and other investment classes in that kind of assets. We have a related set held over by crosslinks that goes through about, if we were to interpret it in as though it were being spoken to us, the data sets would be indicating that a series of shifts, not events, but a series of shifts will occur beginning this year, probably beginning before the end of August, based on our timing here, that will lead to gold and silver. Silver, this is how it's termed, silver and gold meeting in union. Now, the meeting in union is a very specific definition we've got. I won't go into any of the details, no point, but basically what it comes down to is a one-to-one correspondence or equality between silver and gold. Now, it's not saying that's going to happen soon. It looks like it'll be a 12-year process. I don't think it's referring to 12 months. We don't have a designation on this. We have the long time, and 12 days isn't going to cut it. 12 weeks doesn't do it. 12 months seems even too short. But it does say that we're going to be basically pushing towards parity. And it's indeterminate, I guess. We only have the one reference to the amount of time that it might take here. Okay, so we've got a Black Swan coming. It's going to settle in some way on the economic situation, temporarily linked to the suicides going down that will be involving officialdom to the point where they can't react at all, and it allows the Swan to really get a good landing instead of the guys coming on out and kicking her off, you know. That is our situation as we head in towards August. Now, we know that the fix on silver is going in August, and it may be that that's also going to end up being the Black Swan that hits the economy for whatever reason. I don't know how these things are so interconnected. But in our data, that surely seems to be a transitory month or month and a half, because it does seem to stretch a bit into September as these things really get rolling. We've got a let's see, that would be a near doubling. The size, and no, I'm not talking price, but in terms of the emotional component to the general population that precious metals represents, that emotional value, that emotional trigger level, will nearly double over the course of this, or as a result of the events that go down in August, such that by the end of September, we're seeing, so about 30 days after, 35 to 45 days after our initial series of triggers, if our timing is accurate in our model space here, we will get a situation where the emotional understanding of what silver and gold represents will have doubled among the population. That would be one way of interpreting it. Another way to interpret it, because the data is somewhat vague, is that those people who are aware of gold and silver will have doubled their emotional attachment to it. There's no indication here that we're talking about price, but of course, if you've got a lot of people interested in buying gold and silver, and or there's something of a panic to buy it by those people in the know, either way, I'm sure it'll get translated into some form of price movement. Of course, if it tries to go up, the suppressors are going to come along and suppress it, but then after mid-August, there won't be a silver suppressing fix going on, so what's that going to mean? It's really interesting because the data sets go on to say that now that centralization has retreated, would be one way of looking at the particular primary support, decentralization takes over. The individual moats or purchasers, I guess we would think of it, will gain power as we go forward from here. there's some indication that there's going to be a lot of discussion about tactics and attempting to control the market with firmness by some other. Well, I believe we're talking precious metals market here, but it's vague as to what the market is under the circumstances. But they're going to try and decide to control it with other mechanisms, apparently some level of maybe setting margins or something, I don't know. But some other mechanism other than the fix, because there's going to be a real discussion about disorder and chaos that could potentially ensue. So that's all. There's also a supporting set. This is also the very last of the lower level supporting sets. It's a tertiary set. It has crosslinks back over to another set that we see about 45 days out. That basically would suggest that if we were to look at August, September, and October, and the first part of November, so say from mid-August through to mid-November, we would be looking at a 90-day period that could be divided, that could be characterized within that 90 days as being the beginning of a new cycle. Maybe we could describe that new cycle as the next bull market for precious metals, or the giant bear market for paper currencies and derivatives and so on. However, either way, the cycle itself is being described as being split into these two halves of about 45 days of each. So 45 days that lead to the setup, and then 45 days that lead to the disorder and the emergence of chaos and the inability of the powers that be to intervene or control. And so that now you have to understand that while we do have crosslinks over from the officialdom crisis back over to the economic stuff, it's not like one is dependent upon the other. They're simply temporally connected because of the proximity in a temporal fashion, and because of the fact that the powers that be are monkeying about with everything and trying to control everything. And so we end up with all of these so interconnected we can hardly tell them apart, entity structures that we really have to tease everything apart from them. Okay, it's been, I don't know how long this will be totally, because we're already into multiple segments here. There are a couple of more elements that need to be discussed. We've got some really interesting space goat fart kind of stuff that suggests that there's going to be a pending announcement, Russia plus China space exploration. It's going to shock the carp out of a lot of people's ponds. The way in which it's going to be announced itself will shock a lot of people here in American Empire officialdom especially. There's going to be another space goat fart separate from the Russians and Chinese going off to explore space and colonize planets and all this sort of thing. Oh, and also, by the way, they're willing to accept Westerners, as part of this effort. You'll see when they announce it and how they're going to go about it. It's going to be basically they're going to try and set up and be planetary or global about this, although it's quite clear that, who's in charge, right? And how and because it's their money and so they're making the rules. But the way it looks like, it's like, if I were to describe it in a comic book fashion or TV fashion, it would be sort of like Russia and China combined, to create the global space force or global space cadets force, that kind of thing. Okay, we have data suggesting that we're going to get some kind of a fire issue from space, more fireballs. I don't think we're dealing with meteors per se, because the fire appears to be described as a new scientific phenomenon. I'm just going to have to go through these really fast, guys, just because there's so many of them and I've got to get other things done. And we're likely to get more interruptions here. We've got something showing up as the detaching principle. Okay, this is going to be a scientific discovery that's going to come out of the unknown. It's cross-related to this lattice stuff about water, how the water molecule doesn't actually exist. And there's just these fleeting cross connections electromagnetically and energetically within water that we don't really understand. We can vaguely describe them, and that is in some way connected to this thing called the detaching principle. This is in some way itself cross-connected over to anti-gravity, and is going to be a propeller for a proponent or an impeller in a social, cultural way, not like a way, not an actual mechanism, towards getting anti-gravity off the ground. Ha ha ha. Pun intended. Anyway, we also have a lot of data suggesting that there's going to be a couple of new breakthroughs in seed culture, that we're going to get new information about seed germination that we hadn't been aware of before. This is in some way, again, linked to this lattice water business. It'll be very significant, the seed germination stuff, in a way that we don't really anticipate as it comes on out. A lot of people are going to go ho-hum about, new way to germinate seeds. But it's going to mean all the difference in the world to the previously stated global space cadet corps, because the implication is that we're going to figure out a way to germinate seeds and grow plants in space. Really cool. Something that's not ever been accomplished. So anyway, let's see, what else have we got? Okay, there's a lot of references that are cross-connected between the Terra entity and the Space Coat Farts entity that suggest that lightning is going to be a really nasty fire-causing situation all through the western North America and even into Central and maybe South America this year. Even though South America is heading into winter, there are big dry areas that are apparently going to be struck by extra-seasonal lightning storms. A lot of the lightning storms here are being described as energetic particles from space in the forms of high-energy particles from space that create the precursors to hurricane kind of conditions, a supercharged upper atmosphere, and we're going to get a lot of this superchargedness coming out of the atmosphere in the form of lightning. And sort of the good news is that whatever they call them, I can't think of the moment, the lightning, when it strikes into sand, will fuse the sand in these curious long shapes and stuff that are really cool. And this is the kind of stuff that gets these meteorite men all excited. And there's going to be a lot of them. So it's going to be a boom year for for that. If you like those things, get your shovel ready. There are going to be a lot of them. Let's see. There's going to be a lot of displays of atmospheric phenomena. Described on one hand here as beautiful, filled with splendor, awe, that kind of thing. On the other hand, it's going to be not understood. Scientifically, they don't know what it's related to. If I go down through these, one of these atmospheric events is the previously mentioned swirly thing. Swirly thing alert that we had in the last of these reports. The swirly thing, by the way, is a description that would fit the Norway spiral. So it's just, there's going to be a vortices, the swirly visual kind of thing that's going to be in some way attractant to humans. They'll take pictures of them, and it'll also be associated with these other odd, sometimes not previously recorded atmospheric events that will be occurring in 2014. It doesn't say it's going to end in 2014. It's just starting here. This is within our Space Goat Farts entity. Let's see, we've got more of those over in that other section here. Just a second. Okay. We have a lot of cross-connects between the Terra entity and the Space Goat Farts entity, not only in the lightning set, but in the weather area directly. There is, of course, the constant chemtrailing. Space Goat Farts entity is suggesting that there's going to be contention and tension, contention and tension, conflict, all different kinds of stuff relative to chemtrailing. It could be a lot more mainstream. It doesn't indicate that it's going to change anything, but the visibility level is going to rise about 3.5 or 4 times in terms of value. About 4 times here. So we'll see a lot more in the alternative press about it. There's some suggestion here that there's an effect that's going to be accruing or occurring to the chemtrails that I guess we'll have to call something like a gravity well indicator. In other words, the data is describing a situation where chemtrails are put out into the sky and they inadvertently reveal gravity waves rolling through them because the skies are so uniformly gray and hazy and flat like that, that when a big, large gravity wave rolls through, or a gravity anomaly shows up in the form of, yet again, another vortices, a gravity imploding kind of a tornado-y sort of a shape, is revealed within these chemtrails, is basically what the description is trying to say here. And there's going to be all kinds of people that, get involved with this. In terms of taking photos, it's going to be, well, there's some cross-links here to political parties, so maybe it will get enough pressure here to rise up to the level of the political discourse here in the great and terrible American empire. And I guess that's going to be it for the moment. I've got to fuse all these into a single report and do all the other stuff. And then there's still all these other projects that are getting true. And yep, there goes another one of them. Okay, that's it for now, guys. We're looking at, I want to say, I frequently say, it might be a couple of days. But no, realistically, we're looking at probably a week and a half at minimum to maybe 3 to 4 weeks between each set of these reports. It's just the way the data is flowing, but we're finally getting a little bit stabilized and getting our server garden its new home where it won't have to move for hopefully a while, and working out some of the details of getting our broadband connections and so forth. So, we might be good to go, and we might be able to actually shorten it down to one of these every week or something, but no promises on that. I don't have any indication that I'll be able to get another one of these out for at least 2 weeks, just based on the data stream and what we've got to do. So that's it for that period of time. Thanks so much for listening. I guess that's it. Bye, y'all.